Hi, and welcome to The Bold Space, where I am starting the conversation on race with my friends. First, I want to set up the space as not only a safe space where we can feel free to say what we need to say and ask the questions that need to be said, but make it a bold space so we can have these bold conversations and talk about things that we possibly haven't talked about before. And all of this conversation is in the hopes that we can all learn and grow and get better, and figure out all of this racism and really begin to deconstruct it and move on and create a better world. This week, I have with me Stefanie Sertich from Laguardia Community College. Would you like to tell a little bit about yourself and your work at Laguardia?
Sure. Thank you so much, Derek, for doing this. Thank you for inviting me. When you first texted me about it, I was like, yes, I'm so honored and I'm humbled. And I think this is so needed and you're extremely brave in doing this. So thank you for asking for this time. I'm delighted. So I'm the program director of LaGuardia Community College's theater program. It's part of CUNY, part of City University of New York. The theater program is one of 10 programs inside the humanities department. So we work alongside film, TV, commercial, photography, philosophy, communications, everything. And we're in Queens, New York. I've been there for 10 years. And I've done a lot of devised theater, mostly devised theater for social change has been my interest. And so I've done pieces centering around the current topics that are going on right now. We started first with this series called Unpacking American Identity. And the first one was about homelessness. The second one was about Muslim identity. The third one was about Black Lives Matter. And then from there, we moved it into a piece called Intersections, which was about police brutality. This was in 2016. So that was a long time ago. I've also then done work like I directed Bengal Tiger at the Baghdad Zoo, where I learned a lot about Muslim identity. And then I also directed Passing Strange in 2016 as well, 2016. And I got to meet Stu that way. And then we devised a piece called Columbus is Happening. I shouldn't say devised, he created it really based on the students that were there. And that's a piece that's based on Howard Zinn's book, People's History of the United States. That is an alternative history book that not a lot of people know about. And so Stu wrote all this body of material that a lot of it's very much, it's a protest. And it's like a song cycle. And he was very, I don't want to speak for him, but a lot of his thoughts were based on the Colored Museum. So there was a lot of influence on that end. And his work is very satirical as well. So it was awesome. And so most recently, I devised a piece in the fall with the students called The Loop, based on LaGuardia's history, and working with the archives at LaGuardia. And then we were about to do the whiz and do something a little more traditional, because I've done a lot of new work and devised work. So the students, I knew were interested in a big musical, and we were ready for it. And then COVID-19 happened, and we had to end the production quite early.
That was kind of an interesting thing to be dealing with. Coming into that space, and we were starting rehearsals, but there was always this kind of looming over: are we going to get through the rehearsal process? Is the show going to happen? It was very, very surreal to be, looking at this musical and trying to piece it together while dealing with COVID-19. And I'm sure, especially, on the administrative side, it was a nightmare of trying to get all these logistics lined up, and it was hard, but it, I think we did what we could, because we continued the class. And it was sad that we didn't get to perform, because the kids are very talented, and I could tell they so wanted to do the show. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that show brought on, like some of the conversation that show brought on. But first I want to talk about kind of our common connection, how we met. And we met through one of our mutual friends, John Bronston, who I met at Stage Door Manor. And I believe you also met at Stage Door Manor.
Yeah.
And what was the diversity like when you were teaching at Stage Door Manor?
I think John was probably, I think he was the only person of color who was on any artistic side. I think he was maybe I may be wrong and I don't want to say but I think John was, well, he was the only person of color who was a music director, and probably there was not a person of color who, no, I may be wrong, but I have to really scratch my head and think about that. That was in 2007 to 2009, and I think I met him in 2009. But yeah, he was alone in that venture for sure. There was also not a lot of women that were directors, choreographers. There were mostly white men that were on the artistic side. Right? Am I right about that?
Yeah, I mean, even when I was there in 2016, it was still mostly white men. I was the only other Black music director other than John, and then there was only one Black male director. There were no Black women running, on the creative team side. There were a few in the staff, but it was mostly white men running the show. Especially even when you go all the way up to the top level, it's mostly white men that are running the show. And so that for me was a very interesting dynamic. For instance, one of the things they wanted me to do was, and I offered this class, was to teach, a gospel music class, and some other forms of belting that I had taught other classes, but specifically a gospel musical theater class. And whereas I enjoyed teaching it, I kind of look back on the time and look back on how it was looked at in the moment and how people talked about it. And it definitely, I don't know, the kids enjoyed it, but I could tell that I just got this feeling from some of the other staff that it was like, oh, that's that other class that, we'll let them have that. Because they hadn't had that, I don't think, ever, or at least in a long time. Because even I feel like John was more, he did more with rock and roll and more with musical theater specifically, not as much gospel. But it was interesting bringing that into that space and seeing these kids that had never really had any of that before, and looking at that experience, and this was like, oh, this is a group of kids, because there also weren't that many Black kids.
I was going to ask you that. How many Black kids did you have, or any students of color?
I do not remember exactly, because it was a while ago. I want to say in my show there were maybe 2 to 3 out of, I think, 30 girls, and there weren't that many outside of that. And it was my first time going into, I was like, okay, how do I, and so I had to figure out for myself, how do I bring this gospel music and this world, my culture, to this group of white people, and how do I kind of let myself be myself, but also, because assimilation and I was very much of the Black, that was still a time in my life where I was like, I still have to act very white. I still have to, I can't be too Black or they won't like it. And I definitely almost kind of, because there was this conversation that I had with one of the people in charge that was pretty much like, we're going to let you do this gospel class because a lot of the kids want it, but don't make it too Black. It wasn't exactly those words, but that was the juice of that was the main point of the conversation.
Wow. I had my fair share of getting in trouble at Stage Door, actually.
Yeah, it's a very interesting ecosystem, because also too, you're kind of removed from the city. You're upstate New York. You're in this small group of people with one bar and a town that doesn't have many people in it, and so you become this little microcosm, this little mini community that you can feel, and a lot of people have brought up white gaze, and not white gaze as in gaze, but gaze as in GAZ, and how white people look at black people, and sometimes I feel like they don't even necessarily know that they're doing it. It's just kind of ingrained in their head, but as a black person, you can feel it. And I definitely felt a lot of that. Oh, why is this? Because I was also young. I had just turned 21. And I remember it being a big deal and kind of a big problem that, so all the kids towards the end of their session fill out of kind of a form of the things they like, things they didn't like, blah, 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 and they could put down their favorite music director and all this stuff. And a lot of people put me down as their favorite music director, even though they didn't have me in their cast. And I remember hearing conversations from other people that they had overheard of, pretty much who is this person coming in here and thinking I don't know, they were very upset by that. And I don't understand. I understand why, but it definitely kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I was like, if I'm good, why can't I just be good? And that's that. The children are enjoying themselves and they seem to enjoy what I brought to the class. Why is that a problem all of a sudden? And it very much so felt like, who is this? We only let so many black people in here, so who is this new person coming in and changing too many things? And it was like, and I ended up leaving because I was supposed to be there for 3 sessions, but I ended up leaving early because of multiple things. That was one of the things, and then I also had something come up with my apartment in the city that I had to go take care of, and I was kind of happy to leave. I was kind of like, you know what, after I got there, I was like, I don't want to spend an entire summer up here. It didn't feel safe, especially walking in that neighborhood, because there weren't any cars, and so you had to walk a mile to get from where the camp was to the bar. And it was, number one, I was like, I'm not walking that at night by myself.
I remember the same feeling. That was scary.
And because you are in the middle of nowhere, and as somebody from Alabama who knows what happens in the middle of nowhere, and even with the flashlight, it was like, you can't. There was no, we can't drive you anywhere. We can't. And there was no. There felt like there was no thought behind, oh, maybe a black person wouldn't feel safe walking in the middle of the night around these houses and in the middle of the woods around mostly white people in upstate New York, who probably did not want us to be there anyways. Mm-hmm. So there was a very interesting time and a very interesting it kind of turned on the switch for me of like, oh, this is what I'm into. Because I had also just moved to the city that January. And so I was getting my feet in the water here and trying to figure out the world here. And I expected it to be a little different considering we're in New York. And generally speaking, a lot of people here think about those things, or at least I thought they did. But yeah, it was interesting. I don't know if you have any stories or if you have anything you witnessed like that. Granted, there weren't many black people there when you were there, so.
Right. Well, I first want to say I'm sorry that you felt that way. I'm going to acknowledge that and acknowledge that that's trauma, and it's horrible. When I was there, I'm thinking about the students, and I think there were 2 black students. I can see who they are. I don't want to say their names, but I can only imagine how they were feeling. And I'm not sure. I don't want to assume that I know who identifies as what at that time, but I can imagine how the students must feel on top of, if you felt that way, if the students, however, maybe tokenism, we can do this show now because we have this one student to perform this role. And, he was the scholarship kid and all of the promo and press that went over about that is deceivingly wrong, right? Yeah. Like putting a couple of kids who maybe fit that stereotype of like, we're a diverse, I'm not saying that Stage Door ever said that, but those kids were publicized, yeah. And for me personally, you know, I didn't experience that. I experienced other forms of shutting me down. And it was more about content and about the material I was choosing. And I wanted the students to choose the material. That's the way I've always been, is inclusive of the group. And they, once I directed the, what is it called? It's like the acting group that's supposedly the best
I know
actor.
what you're talking about. Yes, well, I can't think of the name, but yes.
I can't think of the name either. It's like the actors version of Our Time Cabaret. And you know, you don't get paid extra for that or anything like that. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. And so when we showed I remember we showed you know, to the camp what the work was. It was after, you know, a production, and I got called into the office and was told, you know, you can't do this material. It's offensive. And I was like, wow, well, okay, like, get it. That's completely fine. However, then tell me what I can and can't do. Like, give me the what's okay in your mind, or come to a rehearsal, see what I've done, and tell me now, while these students have worked so hard to create this work, before we have our final performance, we have to change everything. We have to censor. And they didn't like my response. And so I was not, and then I remember this is, you know, I was directing Pippin at the time, and somebody else was directing Wedding Singer. And one student made a gesture that was sexual on stage, and they wanted the director to cut that gesture. And then I just got vocal and was like, okay, well, if you're offended by that, like, none of us grew up in the same household. So once again, like, you just need to tell us this is children. Like, tell us what's black and white, because my assumption of what I think is okay is definitely not your assumption. So as the directors of the camp, just give me the manual, you know, or because, like, maybe I'm offended by the words rape and sack in Pippin. And when I said that to them, they laughed at me and said, oh, that's just part of the show. I was like, oh, well, maybe my history is involving rape, and you don't know that, and I'm offended and triggered by that. And they didn't, like, I didn't get asked back the next year. And I remember being like, yeah, I think my time is done, you know. I do appreciate the work that they have done for people, and I'm not here to slam them. It's all learning, right? And so it's learning that these are tough conversations, and the arts is, you know, we are reflecting the human experience. And so it's so sensitive and it's difficult. And yeah, so I feel for you. I try to stay away from that bar. You know, it's like, I was freaked out for reasons, being like a single woman walking down that street. I was like, woo!
I mean, the name of the bar is Bummies. I mean, that kind of gives it away as to what, it was a very interesting time. And I think it's kind of clear of, this is kind of what happens when the people running the camp are all white people over the age of 50. And they're set in their ways, and they have certain things they like, they have certain things they don't like. And to be honest, you know, they're out there, it's a private company, they don't have to answer to anybody but the parents, and the parents only know what they want them to know. And, you know, they get to do what they want. And I, you know, because going to it, because I remember watching the movie about Stage Door, because there's the movie Camp that was kind of loosely based off Stage Door, but then there's even the documentary. And I remember watching, I was like, oh, this is somewhere I would love to go. I would have loved to have gone here as a kid. But now having taught there, I would have been like, nope, I would have felt very isolated. And I can't, you know, even as a director and a music director, I felt isolated. So I can't even imagine what it's like to be, you know, not even just a black kid, but a kid of color in that space. And you know, because theater is, you know, supposed to be a place where you should feel like you can have your voice heard, and it should amplify the voices of those that aren't heard. But it definitely, it did not feel necessarily like that when you're there. It felt very much so like, we have an agenda, we do the same, you know, the same things over and over. This is what we do, we're not changing, and that's that.
True. It's
And
true.
and it was also, it also just felt like there's a lot of, and you know, I feel like this is kind of just how theater is after a while, but there was a lot of drama. There was a lot of, just felt like unnecessary drama, where it's like, okay, well, if you know, you get rid of people like Stephanie and I, yet you keep around all these people that you have so much beef with and so much drama with from year to year, and you work with them over and over, yet you haven't just sat down and talked about it. Or, and it's like, I mean, I don't even think I heard all of the drama, you know, and I was there for an entire week, you know, and it was, and things kept coming up, and this person didn't like this. I was just like, I can't. This is not why I'm here. This is not. I'm not being paid enough for this, because it's also, you know.
Oh, yeah.
It was. So I can't imagine what the kids were feeling like, and
Yeah.
what that world is like.
Yes.
From their point of view.
Exactly.
But I hope that, and I think they will, because also too, when I was there, they were in the process of bringing the two owners' daughters into leadership roles, and I think that will help, because they are younger, and they just have a different point of view. But like, you know, there needs to be diversity on that board, and on that, the people running that show from the top down. There just needs to be. Every place that I've walked into in theater, when there's people of color, Black, Asian, whatever, it just is a better and more, it just feels like a safer space, because it feels like everybody's point of views can be represented or heard in some perspective, you know. And there is something to be said about, you know, Black people especially, having gone through the oppression that they have, and being on the side of racism and feeling it every day, that they bring a point of view that, you know, a white person isn't going to understand, and they're never going to understand, and people need to understand that. And no, that's part of why we have to have diversity, because there are things, because of your life, that you're not going to understand.
Exactly. You know, I have hope for Stage Door. I mean, some brilliant students have come out of that school. You know, they've done a lot of great things, and specifically A Strange Loop, you know, with the lead Larry Owens, who I met him at Stage Door. I also met this incredible music director and composer, Alex Ratner, there, who I've worked with outside of Stage Door, and like, and it's mostly the students, you know. I actually brought John to, I worked at City Lights Youth Theater before they closed, in Manhattan, after I met, you know, after I worked with John. I can't remember even if we did a show together, but we just clicked. And so I brought him into, was that the way, or was it, I can't remember, maybe it was vice versa. You know, it's a little foggy. Maybe he brought me to City Lights. I can't remember, but we worked on some things at City Lights Youth Theater together, and we just clicked, you know. So the people I've met from there have been fantastic, you know. So that's been great. But I think that, you know, Stage Door they have a lot of money there, and they can do a lot of great things, and maybe they just need to be, you know, brought to the attention. And those daughters, I know who they are. They're great. I hope that can happen for them. So
yeah, I have hope for them too, because there is a lot of money there, and there is, you know, it has prestige, and it's, you know, that I feel like there's Stage Door Manor, and then there's one other one that I can't think of the name of, that's also
French Woods or something. Is it
Artist? No, not Artist Woods. French. Yeah, no, it's French Woods, I think. Yes, but I hope that they can start to fix that diversity, because they do create a lot of kids who are very interested in musical theater, and go into the musical theater pool in New York and become actors. And, you know, I feel like the kids do learn a lot there, and it saddens me that there aren't more people of color that get to experience that, and experience it in a safe way, in a safe space. So that I do hope they will Work towards that, and work towards creating a truly safe space there.
Yeah.
But thinking about safe spaces in theater, I want to transition and talk a little bit about the Wiz, and talk a bit about why you decided to switch from doing mostly devised theater and to do a big show, and why specifically the Wiz.
Yeah, so I wanted to give students that love musical theater an opportunity to do a musical, and we do one every 2 years. And when I was thinking about the students that we have who are coming in, it's hard at a community college because it switches so quickly, and students aren't like, they don't come in as a freshman and stay till a senior. They come and go. They have very complicated schedules, and they're torn in a lot of different directions. And I thought the Wiz would be such a great community production to, celebrate them, celebrate the LaGuardia community, and celebrate Queens as well. And so when I was talking about it with the team, with very small team we have at LaGuardia, but a full-time staff and faculty, we felt like the Wiz was a good choice based on the students' reaction to that. When we announced the Wiz, they were very excited. And I had done already In the Heights. I had done Passing Strange, and I'm when I'm looking at the canon, it's for big musicals that can cast 25 students, 30 students, and also something that is, when you pick a show at LaGuardia, you have to consider not just your Black students, but you have to consider your Latino students, your Asian students, your students from Germany, your students from Pakistan. We do represent 150 different countries at LaGuardia, and students who are not just, Asian American, but who are from Korea, so it's, how do we serve all these needs? And, I have produced Anonymous by Naomi Zuka. I think I may be pronouncing that incorrectly. And I hired Awoy Tempo to direct that piece. And we decided to do that piece together because Anonymous could be anybody, it's not specific to a certain race. And there's amazing plays and musicals out there, but it seems to be so specific sometimes, and with LaGuardia, you really, I have a student who's, it's so diverse that it's challenging to find the right piece. And we felt like the Wiz could be, as you and I have talked about, and you've talked about with the students, it could be a diverse cast of, could it be multi races? Yes. Could it be, I think you said you've done it with white people as well?
Yeah, when we did it in high school, it was our cast was like 50-50. And granted, the four friends were all people of color, or we're all Black. But outside of the four friends, Eveline, and yeah, and that's about it. They were all cast as Black people, but outside of that, everything else was pretty much blind cast in that show. And in high school, and kind of looking back on it, there were some moments where they could have been handled better, but I think it was a good show, and I thought it worked okay, as long as the four friends and the leads were Black. And it actually wasn't until I got to LaGuardia and we started having the conversations with the kids there that I realized how precious it was, how precious of a show it is to Black people, because I've always loved the show and it's always been a part of my life. But this is the first time I kind of saw this reaction of not wanting to change anything about it, and kind of wanting to stay very rooted in what it was. And it makes sense, because when you think about it, it's the only show that it's the only Black show that has had a Black composer that won best score for a Tony Award. it's the only show that we had at the time, that was, that felt like a Black show, even though it was, a white story, or I think it's a very universal story, but it was one of the first mainstream shows that a lot of people know about, that was made into a movie that was for Black people. And so, and then and let's talk a little bit about the conversations we had. I want to talk a little bit about the conversations that we had as we were starting to get into the show, and as people started to voice their concerns, because I would say 90.99% of the show was cast with people of color, except for Glinda, was a white woman, and then the six Munchkins were young white kids that you knew from other productions, and you knew their parents. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about your choice behind that, and how that kind of led to some of the conversations we had.
Yeah, I mean, the casting choice with Glinda was, Shelley is a phenomenal singer, and when we were auditioning, it was like, where could her voice be placed? And also she, has a lot of experience. She has more, she's really she's actually a professional performer. And I wanted to make sure, that the students were also, even though she's a student, there's learning on all ends. And Shelley also has, I hope she's okay me saying this, some physical restrictions that wouldn't allow her to be in the ensemble. So we had a conversation about that, and we discussed where she would be most comfortable, and it was a decision with the music director, who had worked with, the woman, Professor Despain, who taught them the score, has been their vocal professor for, she's taught vocal class to a lot of the students. So she was like, Shelley is the right fit. So a lot of the casting choices came down to the voice, came down to who could sing what, and also to make sure that we were casting, Black students in these main characters. And then, the choice of the Wiz with that student Rodney, he's I can't remember if he's Dominican, Puerto Rican, or both. I can't remember. That's a hard role to play as an actor. And in the callbacks, we had a lot of different students, playing that role. And I was like, when Rodney, spoke, and he got the comedy, he got the depth of it, and it was kind of like the talent was the decision there. And then with the little Munchkins, I didn't even know about having kids in this. I didn't think that would be, I was like, I don't know. Is that a good idea? Should we have kids? And I didn't, going with my own probably bias and my own privilege and my own lack of awareness, I didn't even think that having some white kids as Munchkins would be as big of a problem as it was. And that's the blind spot, right? Huge blind spot right there. And it was like, the fact that it didn't cross my mind, I was like, it came out of friends. I mean, Mike, the technical director, his daughter was one of them, because he could bring her to rehearsal and bring her home. Because he's a staff member. And then one of my best friends who I've gone to college with, her boys, just twins, they had done a show with some other boys, and I went to go see them perform. It was like a little casting session, and I was like, yeah, they're great. If this mom is willing to bring these 4 boys to rehearsal and, trust me, this is, it's not their school. And it's not a professional production. So there has to be trust that these parents would have that I've never met. And so it was like through a friendship. So it was through my friends. And, looking back now, that was definitely a blind spot. I wish that I would have been able to make a different decision, because I didn't realize, and I mean, yes, there are white people that live in Queens, and this was set in Queens, and that can be justified, but I didn't understand the harm that it had on the students. And now I do, you know, and it's complicated, right?
It's very complicated, and it's also it's very multi-layered because, you know, when I walked in, you know, I'm gonna be honest, when I walked to the first rehearsal, I was actually surprised at the amount of people of color in the room. I expected it to be more of a mix, and it's surprised in a happy way. I was like, oh, okay. I was like, okay, this will be good. Um, but then I, you know, as we started to have those conversations in rehearsals, I, you know, even I saw, I was like, yeah, I understand why they're upset and why they felt so um felt like the show was so precious, and I don't, not even really precious, but they just wanted it to be done right. They had seen it done wrong before, and they just wanted to make sure it was being done right. And but with that said, I also think it would have been a good experience for those kids as well to be around this group of people of color and to be in this show that is about, you know, and I feel like they would have learned a lot. Um, you know, I feel like there are a lot of white people that would have benefited from being in that place and being a part of that culture. And so it's like this double-edged sort of, you know, on one hand they should be cast, but on the other hand it could have been a good informative experience for them that would have changed how they looked at people. And you know, I saw that, and I also understood, you know, from your point of view, you know, you're also working very hard. You're running this whole program. You're dealing with the constraints that are thrown down from people above you. You're, you know, trying to put all this together. And whereas in an ideal world, yeah, we would have preferred for a Glinda to be a person of color and to gone out and find munchkins that were kids of color, but there also is the restraint of time, and I think that sometimes can get in the way of doing things right. Of it was busy, and I you know, I saw even when I came to the first production meeting that I came to, it was I could tell from that meeting that it was a very busy school and that you were doing much more than just the show. And so, you know, I do want to say that I understand, well, where you were coming from when you made that decision, and I also tried to explain that to the kids, and I think they eventually came around to that, because we had one very long and very, you know, needed, but it was a hard conversation, um because it did feel a little bit like they were attacking you a little bit, but you know, they also had their right to. And that conversation, because I am not one that is very vocal about race. I try not to, because I experience it all the time. I try not to think about it too much. I try not to talk about it too much. But it was the first time me kind of, even I in that moment was trying to figure out, yes, they're right, but also Stefanie has her point, and also I didn't want you to feel, you know, attacked, because that's how I feel when people come at my ideas. They come at my ideas of, why are we doing this? Or like, you know, the Griffin Matthews video with you know, how the producers told him, you know, people don't want to hear about slavery, we need to cut that. And and it's not exactly the same feeling, but I could see how you were feeling a feeling that I have felt before, and it kind of made me sad that, because, you know, even though I've been through it, I don't wish any ounce of that on anybody else, because it's horrible. I don't want anybody to deal with it. I want people to learn from it and learn and be better and learn what they're doing wrong. But I also I don't want the script to be flipped, so to say. But that was a delicate conversation we had. What would you say that you learned from that conversation and your takeaways were from that conversation?
Um, so yeah, I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I want to, you know, I have a question for you after this. I want to make sure I I want to know a little bit more. So I had an experience. First of all, like Shelley is a student, and so there's a requirement to do productions to graduate. And so that was when we first started the program. There was 11 theater majors, and now there's like 150 theater majors, and the administration hasn't grown the faculty size to support 150. It's just been out of, the pursuit. And when I chose Passing Strange, I had a white student who was from the Frank Sinatra Performing Arts High School, and he was in my acting class. And when I announced that we were doing Passing Strange, he said, well, can I audition for the lead? And I said, well, I explained the show and explained that there was not room for him, that this is a play, this is a musical that is specifically about a Black male, his experience growing up in Los Angeles. And there's a number called The Black One. There's, this is the story. I said, but there's a lot of other roles. And when I cast it, I did cast it extremely diverse. And that was a risk because it wasn't how it was done on Broadway. And Stu saw it. And when he saw it, I was like, oh no, the creator is here. And he was like, this is exactly what I wanted. I want this to be this way. So after that experience with that student told me, profanity against me for choosing this, for not standing up for him when I chose this production, because the students in that classroom were like, he was not happy with the choice and he felt like his voice was not heard. And I was, moderating both sides of the room, and he felt that I was not standing up for his whiteness. And he, made it so clear to me after that, how he's ashamed of me. And I was like, I was struck by that. And that's always been kind of, something to consider. Like, I have to support all students in this school as my job. So I needed to support Shelley in some way. What I should not have done was cast her as the role of Glinda, that is like white savior. Like, I just didn't see that. Again, like, I had cast actually another young lady, Hananiah, but she had complications and she couldn't do it. So Shelley was only supposed to be Aunt M. And that's a complex character as well, right? So getting back to your question, I realized that I should not direct 2 shows back to back, that the burnout caused me to be, it's still there. I have like 3 years of burnout that I shouldn't have been doing as many shows as I've been doing. And the burnout has caused me to have a big distance, and a distance away from recognizing, like, there's I don't know how to explain it, except when you're so tired and you're just going through the motions, you can't see everything all the time, right? And so I just couldn't function. And you saw some of those production meetings, I would cry. Like, I was like, it was hard.
The burnout is real. With everything, and it's, I'm even starting to feel it with everything being, constantly seeing all of this stuff on Instagram about everything that's going on. It's like I'm even feeling burnout from social media, and it's real.
Yeah,
very real.
Yeah, and I've learned a lot. So I think, like, I initially didn't want to direct it. I wanted Jermaine Rowe to direct it, who is a man of color, and he couldn't do it because he had another show, and he's an adjunct, and I've worked with him before. And then I had asked the professor, who is full-timer, who is Black, to be our dramaturg, and he said he doesn't like The Wiz. And I wish I would have been like, why don't you like The Wiz? As a man of color, how come you don't like The Wiz? And I think that if he and I could have had more of a conversation there, I think I would have understood a little bit more. So because I tend to have to, like, jump from one show to the next, from one semester to the next, there's no postmortem that happens on our end, my end. I don't have a chance to reflect, and I don't have a chance to, like, go, okay, what's next? It's just like the next thing. And there's a huge cost to it now, and the cost is probably some very hurt feelings and some trauma on those students. And I I don't know if we're how to ever solve that at this point, except to learn and hope that that I don't make those same mistakes for future students. I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot.
The secret of Black people is we have been acting on stage and off stage.
How do we change the color of these people and this da-da-da-da? And well, I was like, why don't we have the students who are the Aspire Arts leaders, why don't we bring them into the room and we can start to diversify generationally? Why are we so stuck? Well, we're faculty. We have these PhDs or these MFAs. That's great, but who cares? I always felt like I wanted to be with a specific group of students because I felt like I wanted to hear and elevate them as opposed to a white voice.
Growing up, I was like, oh, I want to own a Broadway theater and I want to do this and I want to be Ziegfeld. But, as I've gotten older, I find myself going, is that dream worth putting time into? Is that realistic? Am I ever going to do that? And I should not have to think that because of the color of my skin.
It was a Black man and a white woman holding hands, walking down the street. And I remember my grandma going, oh my goodness, I can't believe that. Shame on that. She was shaming an interracial relationship.
We as Black people were silenced for so many years. Of course we're going to be loud now. We can't hold it back anymore.
The way we'd ever end any kind of racism was to do what we're doing right here.